No Tax on Books by United States Senator Charles Sumner, 1864. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Remarks in the Senate. The Senator from New York, Mr. Morgan, has proposed the exemption of a class of hospitals. I am in favor of his proposition. It is not now, however, under discussion. In similar spirit, I move to strike out on the 135th page, lines 212, 213, and 214 as follows: on all printed books, magazines, pamphlets, reviews, and all other similar printed publications, except newspapers, a duty of 5% ad valorem. I make one remark on this tax. We do not tax wheat or corn because they are the staff of life. In my judgment, a tax on books is less defensible than a tax on wheat or on corn. I believe books are the staff of life, and I believe that our country would do itself honor if at this moment, when imposing a heavy tax upon all things, it deliberately exempted books. The tax proposed is applicable to all books, books for family reading, for the library, and also for the school. All that we can get from the tax will be very small indeed. It will not add sensibly to the Treasury, but it will impose a burden upon knowledge. I hope, therefore, that the Senate will strike the words out. The motion was rejected. At the next stage of the bill, Mr. Sumner renewed his motion to strike out the tax on books, and then said: Mr. President, I am sorry to occupy the attention of the Senate even for a moment, especially at this late stage of a protracted debate. But I feel that the question which I have presented is not adequately appreciated. I venture to say that, in point of principle, few questions of equal importance have arisen on this bill. The tax on books is peculiar, and, so far as I know, without precedent in other countries. In England, paper has been taxed, but books not. Here, paper is to be taxed, and books also. For instance, there is to be a tax of 3% on paper, and then 5% additional on books, making a sum total of 8% on books. The tax of 3% on paper seems contrary to sound policy, but the additional tax of 5% on books is more indefensible still. I have already likened it to a tax on wheat or flour or bread, which you do not think of imposing. More than either of these is a book the staff of life. It may be likened also to a tax on the light of day, like the English window tax, which you do not think of imposing. Better shut out the light of day than the light of books. The book in some cases may be a luxury, but in most cases it is a necessary, while always the handmaid of civilization. It is for all ages and all conditions, for young and old, for rich and poor, for the family circle as well as the library, but it is especially for the school. In all these places you will enter and demand 8% on every book. Every book, if it had a voice, would repel the demand. Why not be instructed by the example of England when taxing everything taxable? Read the extensive list of articles taxed at the period of most searching and widespread taxation, and you do not find books. Read that marvelous enumeration made by the genius of Sydney Smith, and you do not find books. Quote, taxes upon every article which enters into the mouth, or covers the back, or is placed under the foot. Taxes upon everything which it is pleasant to see, hear, feel, smell, or taste. Taxes upon warmth, light, and locomotion. Taxes on everything on earth and the waters under the earth. On everything that comes from abroad or is grown at home. Taxes on the raw material. Taxes on every fresh value that is added to it by the industry of man. Taxes on the sauce which pampers man's appetite, and the drug that restores him to health. On the ermine which decorates the judge, and the rope which hangs the criminal. On the poor man's salt and the rich man's spice. on the brass nails of the coffin and the ribbons of the bride. At bed or board, couchant or levant, we must pay. The schoolboy whips his taxed top. The beardless youth manages his taxed horse with a taxed bridle on a taxed road, and the dying Englishman, pouring his medicine which has paid 7 per cent. Into a spoon that has paid 15 per cent., flings himself back upon his chintz bed which has paid 22 per cent., and expires in the arms of an apothecary who has paid a licence of £100 for the privilege of putting him to death. His whole property is then immediately taxed from 2 to 10 per cent. Besides the probate, large fees are demanded for burying him in the chancel. His virtues are handed down to posterity on taxed marble, and he is then gathered to his fathers to be taxed no more." A passage so exquisite in wit and language is seasonable here, especially when considering what shall be taxed. But I ask you to bear in mind that the English tax gatherer never laid his hand on a book. Everything else he might touch, a book never. And yet in our country it is proposed to tax books. This is the land of public schools, where you boast that education, like justice, is free to all at the common cost. But a tax on books is in direct conflict with this beautiful principle. Every argument for free schools pleads also for free books, at least for freedom from taxation. It will be a curious inconsistency to rear the schoolhouse, often costly, where every child is welcomed without charge, and then compel him to pay a tax of 8 per cent. On every book he carries in his satchel. There is one term which fitly characterizes this tax. It is a term adopted abroad, but more justly applicable to a tax on books than to any other tax. I mean a tax on knowledge. Such is the tax now proposed, and this tax, which cannot be named without awakening just condemnation, you are asked to make an American institution. After long struggle in England, the various taxes on knowledge are abandoned. I hope that our country, representative and defender of liberal ideas, will not commence a system which modern civilization has disowned. I ask for the yeas and nays. The motion was lost. Yeas 8, nays 19. End of No Tax on Books by Charles Sumner. Read by David Wales.